Beneath the amber lights of Station Velhari 7, something had already ended. The environmental systems hummed at 18 Hz, a frequency chosen by the station's architects to promote calm deliberation. Isolde had read the specifications once, 9 years ago, when she had last stood in this chamber. The temperature read 21 degrees Celsius on the display mounted beside the woven composite wall. Standard. Optimal. Yet her breath did not fog when she exhaled, and this small wrongness, this efficiency that exceeded specification, settled into her awareness like a splinter she would not remove. She checked her mechanical watch. 44 seconds remained. The Galactic Council's vote had concluded 11 minutes prior. 89-0. Civilian seizure authorized. 4,211 human civilians identified across 7 stations, 12 planetary outposts, 2 research vessels. Isolde had watched the tally accumulate on the curved display above the council tier, each digit a bead on an abacus she had learned to read before the council's clerks understood what they were counting. Her fingers found the pocket knife in her uniform jacket. Grandfather's. Carbon steel, wooden scales worn to the color of old bone. She had used it 9 years ago, 3 months, 14 days, to cut the ribbon on the first integrated school on Velhari 4. The ribbon had been synthetic, unnecessary, ceremonial. The knife had been necessary. She had kept the ribbon in her quarters until it degraded, then burned it. The knife remained. 41 seconds. Commander. Ren's voice came from the chamber's secondary entrance, the one used by logistics staff who had no business observing council votes. Isolde did not turn. The junior officer moved to her left, close enough that the ionization sharpness of the recycled air carried the faint trace of her soap, something manufactured in Bristol that Ren had shipped at personal expense for 3 years running. 89-0, Ren said. Not a question. A signal. Isolde's thumb opened the knife's blade, felt the familiar resistance of the back spring, the small click that was not quite the 18 Hz hum. She closed it. 37 seconds. They think they have hostages, Ren said. They don't know we invented the game. Isolde turned her wrist, watched the second hand complete its sweep. The watch had been her father's, then her grandfather's before that. Mechanical. Impossible to hack, to trace, to subpoena. The Council's surveillance systems recorded biometric data, communication patterns, thermal signatures. They did not record the position of a second-hand relative to a pocket knife's opening and closing. 29 seconds. Marisol Varenian, Isolde said. 5 years old when taken. Daughter of Dr. Ilara Varenian, xenolinguist, Velhari, 4 research outpost. Council's designated hostage doctrine specialist. Trained since age 12 in psychological leverage techniques, specifically the exploitation of species-specific attachment behaviors. Ren's breathing shifted. Not faster. Deeper. The kind of adjustment Isolde recognized from her own training, decades prior, in rooms where oxygen was rationed to maintain alertness. She's one of the 4,211, Isolde continued. She has been for 9 years. Her expertise is genuine. Her application of it, should the Council choose to deploy her, will be flawless. It will also be irrelevant. 20 seconds. The chamber's amber lighting flickered, a microsecond variation that would not register on biological perception unless the biological in question had spent 43 years learning to notice what others filtered. Isolde noticed. The station's power grid was load balancing, redirecting energy to a communication array that had not existed 9 years ago. Callum Edinburgh, she said. Age 6 when relocated. Model train enthusiast. His father was a station engineer who understood that children need hobbies more than they need proximity to their parents' workstations. Marisol was given model trains to study. Human attachment patterns. She analyzed Callum's drawings of locomotives for 3 years before she understood that the drawings were not data. They were friendship. 14 seconds. Isolde withdrew her hand from the pocket knife. The blade had not opened again. The gesture had been sufficient. She turned to face Ren, the younger woman's face pale under the amber light, her eyes reflecting the same color that had illuminated Isolde's own reflection for 9 years of briefings, of coded messages, of silent exoduses conducted under the cover of maintenance schedules and supply chain optimizations. Quillari Healer Ven Ash, Isolde said. 71 years old. Medical Emergency Channel Authority. She sent a message 17 minutes ago, before the vote concluded. Not the first. She remembers the first exodus, though she was not permitted to speak of it. She will remember this one. She will speak of it, now that the silence no longer serves. 8 seconds. Phase 1, Isolde said. 4,211 civilians relocated to 23 sites across 4 sectors. Completed 9 years, 3 months, 14 days ago. Phase 2, Council confusion, institutional lag, the assumption that human attachment to individuals constitutes a vulnerability rather than a distributed network. Currently in progress. Phase 3, designation REVC, activation of 31 supply nodes, Medical Corps convening under Ven Ash's authority, for species suspending enforcement pending verification. She checked her watch. 0. Isolde opened the pocket knife. She did not look at it. She looked at the chamber's observation window, the stars beyond, the particular arrangement of them that she had memorized in childhood and that now, she knew, Ren had also memorized, along with 4,210 others, each according to their need, their function, their place in the network that was not a chain of command but a web of recognition. 44 seconds permitted emotion. Isolde permitted herself to feel the weight of the knife in her palm. The wooden scales. The blade that had cut a ribbon 9 years ago and would, she knew, open a letter tonight. Sigrid's letter. Reykjavik sourdough, kept alive 4 years in detention. Dead at 34, buried in a station garden that had not existed when she was born, that would not exist in the records the council would now search and find empty. The knife closed. The emotion window closed with it. Come, Isolde said. The council will send Councillor Varek Thes to inform us of their decision. He will expect grief. We will provide him with logistics. They walked from the chamber through corridors that hummed at 18 Hz, past woven composite walls that had been manufactured to specification 9 years ago by a company that no longer existed, that had never existed in any registry the council could access. The air tasted of ionization and the faint residue of Ren's Bristol soap. The temperature remained 21 degrees Celsius. Isolde's breath still did not fog. The bonsai required adjustment. Isolde stood in her quarters, the nutrient mist settings displayed on a screen she had installed herself, using tools from a kit that had arrived labeled as personal effects from Earth. The kit had contained, beneath a layer of clothing and books, components that assembled into something else entirely. She had assembled them 9 years ago. The bonsai had been her cover then, a hobby eccentric enough to explain her reclusiveness, harmless enough to invite no scrutiny. She adjusted the mist cycle from 14 seconds to 12. The tree, a juniper variant engineered for zero-G root development, responded to nothing she did. It lived or died according to principles she did not control. This was the point of it. This was why she maintained it. A chime. The door. Ren entered without waiting for acknowledgement, a liberty she had earned 6 months prior during a supply audit that had required 17 consecutive hours of synchronized data manipulation. She carried a tablet displaying the council's official notification, the document that transformed the vote into action, into reality, into the false resolution that would sustain until Phase 3 completed. Thesvor has been assigned to liaison, Ren said. Varenian Analyst Corps. Not the counselor himself. A subordinate. Isolde touched the bonsai's needle. It pricked, as it was designed to. Thesvor is more dangerous than Thes. He believes he understands us. His reports will be detailed, empathetic, wrong in ways that serve us better than Varek's contempt. She turned from the tree. The pocket knife rested on her desk, closed, positioned parallel to the desk's edge with the precision that was not compulsion but communication. Ren noted it, as she had been trained to note such things. Marisol's file, Ren said. The council transmitted it to Thesvor 17 minutes ago. Full psychological profile. Attachment disruption thresholds. Recommended leverage protocols. She wrote them herself, Isolde said. Age 19. Her thesis at the Council's Institute for Interspecies Relations. The faculty praised her innovation. They did not recognize that she was describing her own absence, her own relocation, the network that had replaced what they believed they were taking from her. Isolde moved to the window. Station Velhari 7 rotated slowly, revealing and concealing the L4 Lagrange point stable geometry, the gravitational balance that permitted permanent construction without atmospheric drag, without tectonic instability, without the variables that made planetary surfaces unpredictable. The point was stable. The politics were not. This was the lesson the Council had failed to learn, that stability was not a location but a practice, a discipline of maintenance and adjustment, like the bonsai's missed cycle. Callum Edinburgh, she said, though Ren had not asked. He designs train systems now. Freight logistics, primarily. His models became his profession. His friendship with Marisol became her expertise. The Council believes they are exploiting human attachment. They are encountering human transformation. The difference is 9 years. Ren set the tablet on the desk, careful not to disturb the knife's alignment. Sigrid's letter arrived. Encoded in the medical supply manifest. Venash's channel. Isolde's hand moved to her watch, stopped. 44 seconds had passed hours ago. The next window was not scheduled. She permitted the gesture to complete as muscle memory, not emotion, a physical habit that observers would catalogue and dismiss. Read it, she said. Ren did not reach for the tablet. She recited, her Bristol accent flattening with the effort of precision. The sourdough died last week. The starter, I mean. For years I kept it alive, moving from station to station, and then I didn't. I thought I would mourn it. I find I do not. The bread was never the point. The keeping alive was. I believe this is what you intended me to understand. I believe this is why you allowed me to be taken. Isolde watched the stars. The L4 point held them in balance, Earth and Luna and the station between, a geometry of mutual attraction that required no central authority. She had explained this to Sigrid once, years ago, before the detention, before the sourdough, before the letter that would be read and burned and remembered by 4,211 people who had learned to remember without recording. They will ask, Ren continued, about the planning. The years of preparation. They will not understand that there was no plan, only maintenance. The bonsai does not plan to grow. It grows, or it does not. I have grown. This is my report. This is my reclassification. Sigrid. Isolde turned from the window. The knife waited on the desk. The bonsai waited in its nutrient mist. The station hummed at 18 Hz, a frequency chosen for calm, for deliberation, for the long periods of waiting that human institutions required and alien institutions failed to comprehend. Thesvor will request a meeting, she said. Tomorrow, earliest. He will offer concessions in exchange for cooperation. He will frame it as mercy. And we will. Isolde touched the knife. She did not open it. The gesture was sufficient, the weight of it, the history compressed into wooden scales and carbon steel. We will adjust the nutrient mist, she said. We will maintain the tree. We will permit him to believe, for 7 months more, that the ground he stands on is solid. The meeting occurred as scheduled. Thesvor was tall, gray-skinned, the vestigial wing membranes along his forearms folded with the precision of a document properly filed. He spoke human standard with the fluency of long study, the kind that mistook vocabulary for comprehension. Isolde had prepared for him by reviewing his thesis, his psychological profiles, his recommended leverage protocols. She had prepared for him by doing nothing. This was the preparation he could not model. "Commander," he said, in the conference room that smelled of recycled air and the ionization that preceded storms on planets neither of them had visited. "The Council's decision has been enacted. You are aware of the scope." 4,211 civilians, Isolde said. 7 stations. 12 outposts. 2 vessels. Thesvor's wing membranes twitched, a micro-expression his species could not suppress. "Your precision is noted. I had expected difficulty. Grief. The human response to separation." Isolde checked her watch. Not the 44-second window. A different check, the one that marked time until the next supply node activation, the next medical corps convening, the next species suspension that would erode the Council's enforcement capacity without confrontation, without declaration, without the drama that Thesvor's models predicted and required. "We are separated," she said. "This is true. The separation occurred 9 years ago. The Council has only now noticed." Thesvor's voice cracked mid-sentence, a 0.3-second micropause, 4% higher pitch. Isolde noted it without reaction. She had trained herself to notice such things, to file them without response, to permit the other the dignity of their own stress responses. "I don't understand," Thesvor said, recovering. "The civilians are in place. Our verification teams have confirmed." "Your verification teams have confirmed presence," Isolde said. "They have not confirmed identity. They have not confirmed attachment." She reached into her pocket. Thesvor tensed, the wing membrane spreading slightly, a defensive posture his species used when startled. Isolde withdrew her hand slowly, revealing not a weapon but a small object, metallic, worn. "My grandfather's knife," she said. "Used for a ribbon cutting 9 years ago. The ribbon is gone. The school it opened is gone, in the sense that your verification teams would recognize. The children who attended it are distributed across 23 sites, trained in professions your institutional categories do not include. Marisol Varenian is among them. She is your hostage doctrine specialist. She is also a graduate of that school. She wrote her thesis on leverage protocols based on her own experience of their failure." Thesvor's gray skin paled further, a biological response his species could not control. This would require 9 years, Isolde said. 3 months. 14 days. The duration is not the remarkable feature. The maintenance is. The Council has institutions that persist for centuries. You confuse persistence with stability. We have demonstrated the difference. She set the knife on the table between them. Thesvor did not touch it. He recognized, perhaps, that it was not offered for inspection. It was offered as evidence. As boundary. As the physical proof that some tools cut ribbons and some cut throats, and the distinction was not in the tool but in the hand that held it, the decision that preceded the grip. "I will need to verify," Thesvor said. "This claim. These relocations." "You will verify," Isolde agreed. "You will find that the medical corps under Venash's authority has already suspended 4 species enforcement participation. You will find that 31 supply nodes have activated under designation REVC. You will find that the ground you stand on is not ground. It is a platform we constructed 9 years ago, maintained since, and permitted you to believe was natural. Thesvor stood. The wing membranes folded, unfolded, a respiratory distress his species displayed when oxygen mixtures shifted unexpectedly. The station's air remained standard, 21 degrees Celsius, ionization sharpness within specification. The distress was not physiological. This is not, he said, the resolution we anticipated. Isolde retrieved her knife. She did not open it. The click of its return to her pocket was not quite the 18 Hz hum, not quite the sound of a vote tally changing, not quite the sound of 4,211 people breathing in 23 locations that existed in no registry the council could access. The resolution, she said, is 7 months distant. You will spend those months attempting to comprehend what we have built. You will fail. The comprehension is not available to your institutional models. This is not arrogance. It is observation. We have observed you for 9 years. You have observed us for 11 minutes. The asymmetry is not temporary. She stood. The meeting was concluded, had been concluded before it began, before Thesvor entered, before the vote, before the ribbon-cutting 9 years ago when she had first understood that the knife in her hand was not for ceremony. It was for maintenance. For the small, precise cuts that permitted growth in directions the original architects had not anticipated. The young Xyrelian, Thesvor said, as she reached the door. In the medical corps. They asked about the planning. The years of preparation. They asked how humans could maintain such patience. Isolde paused. She did not turn. The 18 Hz hum filled the silence, the frequency chosen for calm, for deliberation, for the long periods of waiting that were not waiting at all but active maintenance, like the bonsai's nutrient mist, like the sourdough starter kept alive 4 years in detention, like the network that recognized her pause as communication and would interpret it accordingly. What did you tell them? She asked. Thesvor's voice came from behind her, smaller than before, the crack still present though suppressed. I told them I did not know. I told them I was still learning what the question meant. Isolde nodded. The gesture was not for Thesvor. It was for Sigrid, for the letter that would be burned, for the sourdough that had died and been mourned and been understood as never the point. She exited the conference room. The corridor hummed at 18 Hz. The temperature was 21 degrees Celsius. Her breath did not fog. 44 seconds remained until the next permitted window. She would spend them walking to the observation deck, where Wren waited with the medical manifest, where Venash's channel carried news of a fifth species suspending enforcement, where the stars arranged themselves in patterns that 4,211 people had memorized according to their need, their function, their place in the geometry of mutual attraction that required no central authority. The knife waited in her pocket. The letter waited in the manifest. The bonsai waited in its nutrient mist, adjusted now to 12 seconds, growing or not growing according to principles Isolde did not control but maintained. The observation deck of Station Velhari 7 was not designed for observation. The name was a legacy of the station's original purpose, a research platform for stellar phenomena that had been repurposed, reclassified, and finally absorbed into the administrative architecture of the Galactic Council before humans had established their first permanent presence in the system. The windows faced the L4 Lagrange point stable geometry, the gravitational balance that held Station Velhari 7 in position without the expenditure of energy that orbital maintenance would require. The view was of absence. Of the space between masses that permitted construction, that permitted presence, that permitted the illusion of permanence. Wren stood at the forward window, her back to the door, her posture suggesting she had been there for some time. Isolde noted this without comment. The junior officer's capacity for stillness had developed over the 6 months since the supply audit, the 17 hours of synchronized data manipulation that had served as initiation, as recognition, as the silent acknowledgement that Wren had become something other than logistics staff from Bristol. The fifth species, Wren said, without turning. Van Ash confirmed. The Xyrelian Medical Authority has suspended enforcement pending ethical review of hostage doctrine applicability. Isolde moved to the secondary window, the one that faced not the Lagrange point but the station's own structure, the woven composite walls that hummed at 18 Hz, the maintenance corridors that had been designed 9 years ago to accommodate traffic patterns that would not exist for 7 years after construction. The architects had been paid, had completed their contracts, had retired or died or simply ceased to respond to inquiries. The station had been built to specification. The specification had included features the Council had not requested, could not recognize, would not discover until they attempted to dismantle what they believed they controlled. 6 months, Isolde said. 7, if Thesvor's confusion produces the documentation delays I anticipate. Wren turned from the window. Her face was pale, as it had been in the Council chamber, but the quality of the pallor had shifted. In the chamber, it had been the compression of information, the weight of knowing what the vote meant while maintaining the performance of not knowing. Now it was something else. Release, perhaps. Or the recognition that release was not the correct term for what followed 9 years of maintenance. Sigrid's letter, Wren said. The full text. There's a section I didn't read. The encoding required Van Ash's private key. Isolde's hand moved to her pocket, to the knife, stopped. The 44-second window was not scheduled. The gesture was habit, not necessity, the physical vocabulary of a language she had learned to speak without conscious translation. The sourdough, Wren continued. She wrote about it. The keeping alive. But there's a postscript, added in a different hand. Not Sigrid's. Isolde waited. The 18 Hz hum filled the space between them, the frequency chosen for calm, for deliberation, for the long periods of waiting that were not waiting but active preparation. She had learned to recognize the quality of Wren's pauses, to distinguish between hesitation and accumulation, between uncertainty and the gathering of force required to speak what had been observed but not yet articulated. Van Ash, Wren said. She added it. 71 years old. She was present at the first exodus, the one no one speaks of. The one that occurred before the Council's current composition, before the institutional memory that now fails to comprehend what we have built. She wrote, the child asks about planning. I tell her there was no plan. There was only the refusal to stop. The sourdough is not the metaphor she believes. The metaphor is the starter. The living culture that persists, that transforms, that requires only maintenance to outlast any single vessel. Isolde turned from the window. The woven composite wall hummed behind her, the 18 Hz vibration that had been specified by architects who had been paid, who had completed their contracts, who had included in their designs the frequencies that promoted not calm, as the official documentation claimed, but a state of suggestibility, of pliability, of the willingness to accept that which was maintained as that which was natural. She understands, Isolde said. Van Ash. She understands that we did not plan. We maintained. The Council plans. They construct scenarios, projections, leverage models. They believe in the architecture of intention. We believe in the architecture of continuation. The bonsai does not plan to grow. The sourdough does not plan to ferment. They continue, or they do not. The planning is the maintenance. The maintenance is the planning. Wren moved to the desk that occupied the corner of the observation deck, a piece of furniture that had not been present 9 years ago, that had been installed by maintenance staff who had been paid, who had completed their contracts, who had included in their installation the data conduits that now carried Van Ash's communications, Sigrid's letters, the network of recognition that required no central authority. The new accord, Ren said. 7 months. 9 names. Including Sigrid's. Isolde nodded. The gesture was not acknowledgement. It was continuation. The new accord was not a document she would sign. It was a document that would exist because she had maintained the conditions for its existence, along with 4,210 others, each according to their function, their need, their place in the geometry of mutual attraction. Read the names, she said. Ren recited them. Not from the tablet. From memory. The training had taken hold, the discipline of maintaining information without recording it, of carrying in biological memory what could not be subpoenaed, hacked, or simply discovered by verification teams who understood presence but not attachment. Matteo. Callum's father. The engineer who understood hobbies. Marisol. The hostage doctrine specialist who wrote her own irrelevance. Sigrid. The sourdough. The keeping alive. The names continued. Each one a node in the network. Each one a maintenance point in the system that had no plan, only continuation. Isolde listened without reaction, her hand in her pocket, her fingers on the knife that had cut a ribbon 9 years ago and would, she knew, open a letter tonight. The last name was Ren's own. You added yourself, Isolde said. Not a question. I completed the audit, Ren said. The 17 hours. I became necessary. Isolde withdrew her hand from her pocket. She moved to the window, the one that faced the Lagrange point, the absence that permitted presence, the space between masses that was not empty but structured, not void but field. The stars arranged themselves in patterns she had memorized in childhood, that she had taught to others according to their need, their function, their capacity to recognize what was maintained without being planned. The young Zyrelian, she said. The one who asked about planning. What did Van Ash tell her? Ren moved to stand beside her, not close enough to touch, close enough to share the view, the absence, the structured field that was not empty. She told her to ask the human. She told her that humans would be present, that they had been present for 9 years, that their presence was not the result of planning but of maintenance. She told her that the question itself was the answer. That to ask how humans planned for 9 years was to assume that 9 years was a duration that required planning. That the human response to duration was not planning but continuation. Isolde watched the stars. The L4 point held them in balance. Earth and Luna and the station between, the geometry that required no central authority, that maintained itself through mutual attraction, through the physics of presence, through the refusal to stop. 7 months, she said. The new accord will be signed. The Council will reclassify their hostage doctrine as inapplicable to human populations. They will not understand why. They will document their decision as strategic adjustment, as response to altered leverage conditions, as recognition of human distributed network resilience. They will not document what they cannot model. The maintenance. The continuation. The 9 years of nutrient mist and sourdough starter and model trains and the small, precise cuts that permit growth in directions the original architects did not anticipate. Ren was silent. The silence was not absence. It was the frequency below 18 Hz, the vibration that the station's architects had not specified, that existed in the structure because it had been maintained, because it had continued, because it was the byproduct of presence that exceeded design. The knife, Ren said, finally. Isolde's hand found it. She did not open it. The gesture was sufficient, the weight of it, the history compressed into wooden scales and carbon steel, the ribbon cutting 9 years ago and the letter opening tonight and the future uses that would not be planned but would be maintained, would be continued, would be the small precise cuts that permitted growth. Grandfather's, she said. He used it to graft apple trees. The same principle. The cut that joins one living thing to another. The maintenance that produces what planning cannot. The continuation that outlasts any single vessel. She withdrew the knife from her pocket. She held it in her palm, not opening it, presenting it to the window, to the stars, to the Lagrange point-structured absence that was not empty. Sigrid's letter, she said. The full text. Read it now. The postscript. Van Ashe's edition. Wren retrieved the tablet. She did not activate it. The reading was complete, had been complete before she recited the names, before she added her own, before she stood at the window and recognized that the view was not of stars but of geometry, not of presence but of the conditions that permitted presence. The child asks, Wren recited, what humans will do when the council learns. When they understand that the hostages were never hostages, that the leverage was never leverage, that the 9 years were not planning but maintenance. I tell her that humans will do what they have done. They will continue. They will maintain. They will adjust the nutrient mist and keep the sourdough alive and make the small precise cuts that permit growth. I tell her that the council's learning is not the event she believes. The learning is the maintenance. The maintenance is the learning. The 9 years were not preparation for this moment. This moment is preparation for the next 9 years. And the next. And the next. Until the council understands that they are not confronting a plan. They are confronting a living culture. A starter that persists. A refusal to stop. Isolde closed her fingers around the knife. The wooden scales pressed into her palm. The blade remained closed, potential not kinetic, maintenance not action, continuation not conclusion. 44 seconds, she said. Wren checked her own watch, a mechanical device she had acquired 3 months ago, after the audit, after the recognition, after she had become necessary. Now. Now. Isolde opened the knife. The click was not the 18 Hz hum. It was not the vote tally. It was not the sound of 4,211 people breathing in 23 locations. It was the sound of a ribbon being cut 9 years ago, of a letter being opened tonight, of the small precise cuts that permitted growth in directions the original architects had not anticipated and could not recognize and would not discover until they attempted to dismantle what they believed they controlled. She used the blade to open the envelope that had arrived in the medical supply manifest, that had been encoded in Van Ashe's private key, that had been written in Sigrid's hand and amended in Van Ashe's. The paper was thin, recycled, the kind used in detention facilities where resources were rationed, where maintenance was difficult, where the keeping alive of sourdough starter became the practice of continuation, the metaphor of persistence, the living culture that outlasted any single vessel. She read without speaking. The 44 seconds elapsed. The emotion window closed. The knife closed with it, the blade returning to the wooden scales, the potential returning to maintenance, the action returning to continuation. She died, Isolde said, finally. Sigrid. Not in detention. Released 6 months ago. Died in Reykjavik, where she had returned, where the sourdough starter had died, where she had not mourned it because the bread was never the point. She died maintaining the network. The local node. The small precise cuts that permitted growth. She died at 34, buried in a station garden that had not existed when she was born, that will not exist in the records the council will search and find empty, that will continue to exist because it is maintained, because it is continued, because it is the living culture that outlasts any single vessel. Wren took the letter. She read without the knife, without the 44 seconds, without the ritual that was Isolde's own, that was not required, that was simply maintained because it had been maintained, because it was continued, because it was the practice of presence that exceeded design. The new accord, she said. 9 names. Including hers. Posthumous. She knew. She maintained the knowledge without recording it. She continued the network without acknowledging it. She was the living culture. She was the starter. She was the refusal to stop. Isolde moved to the window. The stars arranged themselves in patterns she had memorized in childhood. The L4 point held them in balance. The station hummed at 18 Hz, the frequency chosen for calm, for deliberation, for the long periods of waiting that were not waiting but active maintenance, the nutrient mist, the sourdough, the small precise cuts. "The council will sign," she said. 7 months. They will not understand what they are signing. They will document it as strategic adjustment. We will document it as continuation. The difference is not in the document. The difference is in the maintenance. In the 9 years that preceded the signature. In the 9 years that will follow it. In the living culture that persists, that transforms, that requires only maintenance to outlast any single vessel. Ren stood beside her. The two of them at the window, the view of absence that was not empty, the structured field that permitted presence, the geometry of mutual attraction that required no central authority. "The bonsai," Ren said. "Adjusted. 12 seconds. It grows, or it does not. The growing is not the point. The adjustment is. The knife. Maintained. Grandfathers. The ribbon cutting 9 years ago. The letter tonight. The continuation. The stars. Memorized. According to need. According to function. According to the place in the network that each of us occupies, that each of us maintains, that each of us continues." They stood in silence. The 18 Hz hum filled the space between them, below them, the vibration that had been specified, that had been maintained, that had been continued until it exceeded specification, until it became the condition of presence itself, until it was the living culture that the council could not model, could not document, could not dismantle because they could not recognize it as constructed. 7 months later, the new accord was signed. The council reclassified their hostage doctrine as inapplicable to human populations. They documented their decision as strategic adjustment. They did not document what they could not model. Isolde was present at the signing, as she had been present at the vote, as she had been present at the ribbon cutting 9 years ago. She did not speak. She checked her mechanical watch. She touched the pocket knife in her uniform jacket. She adjusted the nutrient mist in her quarters, where the bonsai continued or did not continue, where the maintenance was the planning, where the continuation was the refusal to stop. The young Xyrelian who had asked about planning was present at the signing. She had become necessary, as Ren had become necessary, as 4,211 others had become necessary according to their need, their function, their place in the geometry of mutual attraction. She did not ask about planning. She asked about maintenance. She asked about the small precise cuts. She asked about the living culture that persisted, that transformed, that required only continuation to outlast any single vessel. Isolde answered without words. She opened the knife. She closed it. The click was not the 18 Hz hum. It was not the vote tally. It was the sound of 9 years of maintenance, of continuation, of the refusal to stop that was not defiance but practice, not resistance but growth, not planning but the living culture that outlasted any single vessel, any single document, any single star arranged in patterns that humans memorized according to their need, their function, their place in the structured absence that permitted presence. The observation deck of Station Velhari 7 remained. The windows faced the L4 Lagrange point. The view was of absence, of the space between masses, of the geometry that required no central authority. The station hummed at 18 Hz. The temperature was 21 degrees Celsius. Isolde's breath did not fog. She stood at the window, the knife in her pocket, the letter read and burned and remembered, the network maintained and continued and refused to stop. The stars were there. They had always been there. They would continue to be there, arranged in patterns that 4,211 people memorized, that they taught to others, that they maintained without recording, that they continued without planning, that they passed on as the living culture, the starter. The small precise cuts that permitted growth in directions the original architects had not anticipated and could not recognize and would not discover until they attempted to dismantle what they believed they controlled, what they believed they understood, what they believed was planned rather than maintained, was constructed rather than grown, was leverage rather than the simple, persistent, transforming refusal to stop. The 18 Hz hum continued. The bonsai grew, or did not grow. The sourdough was kept alive, or was not. The knife remained in Isolde's pocket, closed, potential not kinetic, maintenance not action, the living culture that outlasted any single vessel, any single star, any single moment of recognition that was not the point, that was simply the continuation, the adjustment, the small precise cut that permitted what came next, and what came after that, and what continued, maintained, refused to stop.